archive beneath the city. Beneath the city, far below the noise of traffic, beyond the reach of maps and memory, there is a place that was never meant to be found. It does not appear on blueprints. No official records acknowledge its existence. And yet, it has always been there, hidden, waiting. The entrance is nothing more than a corroded metal door, buried behind layers of forgotten infrastructure. Most people would walk past it without a second glance, but for those who notice the inconsistencies, the subtle fractures in reality, it becomes impossible to ignore. The man had followed those fractures. At first, they were small, almost meaningless. A street that seemed to bend differently than it used to. A building that felt unfamiliar despite years of passing by it. Conversations that didn't quite match the memories they were built on. Everyone else dismissed these moments. He didn't. The deeper he looked, the more the world seemed misaligned, as if reality itself had been edited, quietly, precisely, leaving behind only faint traces of what it once was. Those traces led him here. He forced the door open. At first there was only darkness, then light, cold, artificial, endless. The space beyond the door was vast, far larger than anything that could logically exist beneath the city. A cavern stretching beyond sight, filled with structure upon structure, arranged in perfect, overwhelming symmetry, rows, infinite rows. But they were not shelves, not books, not files. They were devices, millions of them, each one identical in shape yet individually marked, small, sleek units, glass-like, softly illuminated from within, casting a pale blue glow into the surrounding darkness. The air felt different inside, still, heavy, as if sound itself had been dampened. He stepped forward slowly, his footsteps echoed too far, too long. Every direction he looked, the pattern repeated. Endless lines of these glowing objects disappearing into shadow and distance like a horizon that refused to end. He approached one. Up close, the surface was smooth, almost organic. Faint light pulsed beneath it, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. And then he saw the label, a date, precise, exact, followed by a time. And beneath it, something else. An identifier he didn't understand. He moved to another date, another time, all different, all meticulously organized. It wasn't random. It was a system, a catalog, but not of things, of moments. A realization began to form, slowly, uneasily, at the edge of his mind. This place wasn't storing objects. It wasn't storing information in the way he understood it. It was preserving something far more fragile, something that could be lost, something that could be changed. He turned slowly, taking in the impossible scale of it all. If each device represented a moment, then this wasn't just a collection. It was a backup, a record of everything that had ever been, or perhaps everything that no longer was. And for the first time since he opened the door, he felt it. Not curiosity, not wonder, but a quiet, growing fear. Because places like this don't exist without a reason. And whatever that reason was, it meant the world above wasn't as stable as it seemed. The discovery. It didn't begin with certainty. It began with something small, something easy to ignore, a detail that didn't fit. At first, he thought it was just memory playing tricks on him. Everyone forgets things, everyone misremembers. That's normal. But this felt different. A street near his apartment, one he had walked through for years, no longer turned where it used to. The corner was sharper now. The cafe that once sat on the edge was gone. In its place stood a narrow building with dark windows and no sign. No one else noticed. When he asked, people looked at him strangely. It's always been like that. That was the first moment something felt wrong. After that, the inconsistencies began to multiply. A conversation he clearly remembered never happened. A book he had read didn't exist. A news event he could describe in detail had no record anywhere. Each time the answer was the same. You're mistaken. But he wasn't. He couldn't be. The memories weren't vague or distorted. They were precise, sharp, as real as anything happening in front of him. That's when he started writing things down. Dates, events, observations. At first, it was just a way to prove to himself that he wasn't imagining things. But soon, the notes became something else, a pattern. There were gaps, moments where reality seemed to shift, not dramatically, not in ways that would cause panic, subtle changes, clean edits, as if something or someone was rewriting the world carefully enough that almost no one would notice, almost no one. The more he tracked it, the more frequent it became. And then he noticed something else. Every inconsistency led back to the same area, a section beneath the city. Old infrastructure, abandoned tunnels, places long forgotten by anyone who lived above them. That's where he went. The entrance wasn't obvious. It was hidden behind layers of neglect, rusted pipes, broken concrete, sealed corridors that no longer appeared on any official map. It took hours of searching before he found it. A door, heavy, metallic, worn by time. No markings, no identification, just there, waiting. Something about it felt deliberate, not forgotten, concealed. He hesitated. For a moment, he considered turning back. Whatever was behind that door, it wasn't meant for people like him. People who asked questions, people who noticed things. But that was exactly why he couldn't walk away. He needed to know. He pulled the handle. At first, it didn't move. Then, slowly, it gave way. The sound echoed through the tunnel, louder than it should have been, like the space itself was reacting. The door opened just enough for light to escape. Cold light. Not warm, not natural, artificial, precise. He pushed it further. The light grew stronger, spilling into the darkness behind him, cutting a sharp line between what he knew and what he didn't. And then he stepped through. Everything changed. The space beyond the door shouldn't have existed. It was too large, far too large to fit beneath the city above. The ground stretched outward into a vast open chamber. Structures rose in perfect alignment, extending farther than his eyes could follow. The air felt still, unnaturally still, as if time itself had slowed down inside this place. He took another step, then another. Each movement felt heavier, like he was crossing into something that didn't belong to the same world. Rows began to form in front of him, endless rows, organized, precise. Whatever this place was, it wasn't abandoned, it was maintained, preserved. And as the door slowly closed behind him, sealing off the world he came from, one thought settled into his mind, quiet but undeniable. This wasn't something he had discovered, this was something he had been led to find. The archive. The first thing he realized was that the space did not obey logic. It wasn't just large, it was impossibly large. From the outside, the entrance had been nothing more than a hidden door beneath the city, buried behind rust and concrete, forgotten by time. But inside, the world expanded into something vast enough to swallow entire city blocks, perhaps more. The ceiling was lost in darkness. The far walls, if they existed at all, were nowhere to be seen, and stretching out before him in perfect, suffocating symmetry were rows, endless rows. At first glance, they looked like storage units, clean, uniform, organized with almost unnatural precision. But as he stepped closer, he realized they weren't shelves, they were devices, millions of them, each one identical in structure, smooth, glass-like surfaces encasing a faint inner glow. Soft blue light pulsed from within, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing through the silence. The air felt heavy, not stale, but controlled, as if this place had been sealed away from time itself. He moved forward slowly, his footsteps echoing across the metallic floor. The sound carried too far, repeating itself in the distance until it became something else, something almost alive. Every direction he looked, the pattern continued. Rows extending into darkness. Perfect alignment, no dust, no decay. This place wasn't abandoned, it was maintained. Carefully, deliberately, he approached the nearest device. Up close, it felt wrong. Not cold like metal, not warm like something alive, something in between. His reflection stared back at him through the glass surface, slightly distorted, as if the material itself didn't fully obey the rules of light. Then he noticed the label, small, precise, etched or projected just beneath the surface. A date, followed by a time, down to the second. Beneath it, a string of characters, an identifier he couldn't understand. He frowned, moved to the next one. Another date, different, another time, different again. Every device was unique, not in form, but in what it represented. He turned slowly, scanning the endless rows. There was a pattern here, not random placement, not chaotic storage. This was a system, a catalog, everything arranged with purpose. His pulse began to quicken. He moved faster now, passing device after device, each one marked with a different moment. Days, months, years. Even entries that didn't make sense, dates that hadn't happened yet, future timestamps. Impossible. He stopped. The silence pressed in around him. If these were records, Then they weren't recording objects or places or data in any conventional sense. They were recording time. No, not time. Something within time. Something more fragile. His hand hovered over one of the devices. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he touched it. The reaction was immediate. The soft glow intensified. The surface rippled, subtly like liquid responding to contact. And then, a flash. Not light, not exactly. Something else, a sensation, a memory, but not his. He saw a street. Familiar, but wrong. The buildings were different, the sky slightly darker, the air carried a feeling he couldn't explain, and then it was gone. He pulled his hand back sharply, breathing uneven. The device dimmed, returning to its quiet, steady pulse. His mind raced. That wasn't imagination. It was too clear, too structured, too real. He looked around again, but this time, differently. Not as a place, but as a collection. Each device wasn't just labeled with a moment. It contained it, preserved it, stored it. Memories, not personal memories, not individual recollections, but something broader, something deeper, moments of reality itself. His chest tightened. If that was true, then this place wasn't just an archive. It was a backup, a record of how things used to be. Before something changed them, before something rewrote them. He turned in a slow circle, the scale of it finally settling into his mind. Millions of devices, millions of moments, all carefully preserved, all no longer current. A chilling thought crept in. If these were the versions that had been replaced, then the world above, the one he had walked through his entire life, wasn't original. It was an update, and somewhere in this endless archive, every previous version still existed, waiting, silent, unforgotten. The lights around him flickered just for a second, a subtle shift, but enough. He froze, because for the first time since entering, the archive didn't feel stable. It felt reactive, as if it knew he was there, watching, learning, and perhaps remembering something he wasn't supposed to. The explanation. He wasn't alone. The realization came not from sound, but from presence. A subtle shift in the air, a feeling that something had changed behind him, even though nothing had moved. He turned slowly. At the end of the row, partially obscured by shadow and the cold blue glow of the devices, stood a man. Old, still, watching. He didn't seem surprised. If anything, he looked patient, as if this moment had been expected. You weren't supposed to find this. His voice was calm, controlled, not hostile, just certain. The protagonist took a step back instinctively. Then why is it here? The old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked forward, his movement slow but deliberate. As he passed between the rows, the faint lights of the devices reflected across his face, revealing deep lines, years of something heavier than age, responsibility or regret. This place, the old man said quietly, exists because it has to. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. He stopped beside one of the devices, resting his hand lightly on its surface. You've already seen what they do, haven't you? The protagonist hesitated, then nodded. A fragment, he said. Something that felt like a memory, but not mine. The old man gave a faint, almost approving nod. Good. That makes this easier. Easier, the protagonist snapped. Nothing about this is easy. What is this place? What are those things? The old man looked at him fully now, and for the first time, there was something in his expression that resembled sympathy. We archive unstable memories. Silence followed. The words hung in the air, simple but heavy with implication. The protagonist frowned. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't need to, the old man replied. It only needs to be true. He began walking again, gesturing for the protagonist to follow. After a moment's hesitation, he did. They moved deeper into the archive, the rows stretching endlessly around them. When reality changes, the old man continued, it doesn't erase what came before. The protagonist's brow tightened. Yes, it does. That's exactly what it... No, the old man interrupted softly. It replaces it. He stopped again, turning to face him. That's a very important distinction. The protagonist said nothing. Think of it like this, the old man went on. What you experience as reality is only the current version, the latest iteration, the most stable configuration. Configuration of what? The old man smiled faintly. That's the wrong question. Frustration flashed across the protagonist's face. Then what's the right one? The old man held his gaze. What happens to everything that came before? Silence. The answer forms slowly, unwillingly in the protagonist's mind. It disappears. Does it? The old man gestured around them. Look again. The endless rows, the glowing devices, the labeled moments. A quiet realization settled in. No, the protagonist whispered. It doesn't disappear. It becomes unstable, the old man corrected, incompatible with the new version of reality. He placed his hand against another device. We preserve those instabilities. Why? The protagonist demanded. If they don't exist anymore, if no one remembers them, what's the point? The old man's expression shifted, not dramatically, just enough to remember. He said quietly that it was ever different. The words landed harder than expected. The protagonist looked away, his mind racing. So everything I noticed, he said slowly, the changes, the inconsistencies. You weren't supposed to notice those, the old man said. But I did. Yes. Why? For the first time, the old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied him, carefully, as if measuring something unseen. That, he said at last, is why you're here. The protagonist felt a chill run through him. No, he said, don't do that. Don't turn this into some vague. You think this is about curiosity? The old man interrupted gently. It's not. He stepped closer. The distance between them closed, and the hum of the archive seemed to deepen, resonating through the floor beneath their feet. Most people adapt, the old man continued. Reality shifts, and their minds adjust with it, seamlessly, effortlessly. They forget what came before. The protagonist's voice was quieter now. Yes, and me? The old man's gaze sharpened. You don't forget. The words settled into the space between them, heavy, unavoidable. That's not possible, the protagonist said, but there was no conviction left in his voice. On the contrary, the old man replied, it's very rare, but not impossible. The lights above them flickered, just for a moment, but this time it felt different, stronger, as if the archive itself was reacting to the conversation. To maintain a system like this, the old man continued, glancing briefly at the surrounding rows, you need more than storage. You need reference points. The protagonist frowned. What does that mean? The old man didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned and began walking again, deeper, further into the archive than before. Come, he said. After a moment, the protagonist followed. The rows began to change subtly as they moved. The devices here seemed brighter, more active, their light less stable, more volatile. What is this section? The protagonist asked. The old man stopped. Then slowly he turned back. This, he said, is where we keep the most unstable records. The protagonist's eyes moved across the devices. Something about them felt different, personal, uncomfortably so. And though he didn't yet understand why, he felt it, a quiet, growing certainty, that whatever explanation he had just been given was only the beginning. The purpose. They walked in silence for a long time. The deeper they went, the more the archive seemed to change. At first, the rows had been uniform, calm, stable, almost mechanical in their precision. But here, something was different. The lights flickered more frequently. The soft glow inside each device pulsed unevenly, like a heartbeat struggling to maintain rhythm. The air felt heavier, charged, as if the space itself was under tension. The protagonist slowed his pace. What is this place, really? He asked, his voice quieter now, not out of fear, but out of something deeper. The old scientist didn't stop walking. It's not what you think it is, he said. That's becoming a pattern. A faint smile appeared on the scientist's face, but it didn't last. You're still trying to understand it as a location, he continued. A structure, a facility. He shook his head slightly. It's not. Then what is it? The protagonist pressed. This time, the scientist stopped. They stood between two towering rows of devices, their flickering light casting shifting shadows across the floor. For a moment, the scientist said nothing. Then, it's a safeguard. The word lingered. A safeguard for what? The protagonist asked. The scientist turned to face him fully. For continuity. The protagonist frowned. That doesn't explain anything. No, the scientist said. It explains everything. You're just not ready to see it yet. Frustration flared, but it faded quickly. Something about this place made anger feel misplaced, like raising your voice in a cathedral. Try me, he said. The scientist studied him for a moment longer. Then he nodded. Reality, he began slowly, is not figured that much. But you don't understand what that means, the scientist continued. You think of change as something that happens within reality, events, actions, consequences. He gestured outward toward the endless rows. But what if reality itself is what's changing? Silence. The idea wasn't new anymore, but hearing it spoken so plainly made it heavier. Then everything changes with it, the protagonist said. Yes, and no one notices. Yes. Except he stopped. The scientist watched him. Except peep, a quiet nod. The protagonist exhaled slowly. Fine. Reality changes. You store what it used to be. I understand that part. He gestured sharply at the surrounding devices. But that still doesn't explain why. The scientist's expression shifted again. Subtle. But this time, there was weight behind it. Because without this, he said, there would be no way to prove that anything had ever changed at all. The protagonist stared at him. That's it, he said. You built all of this? Just to remember? Not just to remember, the scientist replied. To anchor. Anchor what? The scientist stepped closer, his voice lowering. Truth. The word felt unstable, as if even speaking it here carried risk. The protagonist shook his head. That doesn't make sense. If reality changes, then whatever is true changes with it. That's what most people believe, the scientist said. And you don't? The scientist gestured toward the archive again. This exists because that belief is dangerous. A long pause. Explain. The scientist took a breath, not because he needed it, but as if organizing something complex into something that could be spoken. When reality shifts, he said, it doesn't do so perfectly. What does that mean? It means there are discrepancies, residual inconsistencies, small fractures between what was and what is. The protagonist's thoughts raced. The things I noticed, yes. And the memories in here, he continued slowly, they're those discrepancies. They are the original states, the scientist corrected, preserved before they become completely incompatible. Incompatible with what? With the new version of reality. The words settled heavily between them. The protagonist looked around again, but this time the archive felt different. Not just vast, necessary. So this place, he said quietly, is the only record of what used to exist? Yes. And if it didn't exist? The scientist didn't hesitate. Then every version of reality that came before the current one would be erased completely. The protagonist's chest tightened. No memory, no trace, no evidence it was ever different. That's how it appears to everyone above, the scientist said. A long silence followed. The protagonist walked slowly toward one of the devices, his reflection faintly visible in its surface. So you're preserving history? The scientist shook his head. Not history. Then what? Alternatives. The word hit differently. Every time reality changes, the scientist continued, it creates a new configuration, a new version. But the previous one doesn't vanish instantly. It destabilizes. It begins to break apart. He placed his hand gently on a nearby device. We capture it before it collapses completely. The protagonist stared at the device. And these, he said, they're all different versions of the world? Yes. How many times has it changed? The scientist didn't answer, which was in itself an answer. The protagonist let out a quiet breath. This isn't a safeguard, he said finally. It's a graveyard. The scientist's eyes flickered just for a moment. Perhaps, he said, but it's also something else. What? A reminder. Of what? The scientist met his gaze. That none of this is permanent. The lights around them flickered again, stronger this time. A ripple passed through the rows, not physical, something deeper. The protagonist felt it, a shift, subtle, but undeniable. Did you feel that? He asked. Yes. What was it? The scientist didn't look concerned. If anything, he looked attentive. Another change, he said quietly. The protagonist's heart pounded. Just now? Yes. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the endless archive. But nothing looks different. It wouldn't, the scientist said. Not from here. Then how do you know? The scientist gestured toward the devices. Because they do. The protagonist looked back at them. Several units nearby were flickering violently now, their glow unstable, almost frantic. New labels were appearing, new dates, new times, new entries. Right in front of him. They're updating, he whispered. Yes. With what? The scientist's answer came without hesitation. With what no longer exists. Silence. Heavy, unavoidable. The protagonist stared at the newly activated devices, something cold settling deep in his chest. Then this place, he said slowly. It's not just preserving the past. The The scientist didn't respond. He didn't need to, because the realization had already begun to form. If the archive only existed to remember, then why was it still growing? The discovery of self. The section felt different the moment he stepped into it. It wasn't just the light, it was the feeling, a quiet pressure in the air, subtle but undeniable, like standing too close to something that was not meant to be understood. The rows here were tighter, closer. The devices glowed brighter but less stable. Their soft blue light flickered unevenly, pulsing in irregular patterns that made the entire space feel alive and unstable. The protagonist slowed. His breathing became more controlled, more deliberate. "What is this place?" he asked, though this time his voice carried less demand and more hesitation. The scientist didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched him, carefully. "This," the scientist said at last, "is where the most unstable records are kept." The protagonist frowned. "Unstable how?" The scientist gestured toward the rows. "Not all changes to reality are equal," he said. "Some are minor, small corrections, easy to absorb. And others?" The scientist's gaze sharpened slightly. "Others create contradictions." The word lingered. The protagonist stepped forward, drawn toward one of the devices. Something about this section felt familiar, uncomfortably so. He reached out, but before his hand could touch the surface, the device activated on its own. The light flared, brighter than anything he had seen so far. And then, a surge. Not just a fragment this time, a full sequence. He was standing in a room, his apartment, but not as it was, different. The walls were a different color. The furniture arranged in unfamiliar ways. Objects he didn't recognize filled the space. And yet, it was his. He knew it. In the memory, he moved through the room with ease, as if everything belonged exactly where it was. He reached for a phone, answered it, spoke words the protagonist could hear but didn't remember ever saying. A different life, a different version. Then it ended. The protagonist staggered back, breath catching in his throat. That was real, the scientist said quietly. "No," he shook his head. "That didn't happen." "It did. Not to me." The scientist held his gaze. "Yes," he said. "To you." Silence. The protagonist turned slowly, looking at the surrounding devices. Something had shifted. Not in the archive, in him. He stepped toward another unit, then another. This time he didn't hesitate. He touched one. Another surge, another memory, a different street, a different path, a different choice. Him. Again, but not the same. He pulled away, but it didn't matter. The devices around him began to respond, one after another, lights intensifying, surfaces rippling, activating. "You need to stop," the scientist said, but his voice sounded distant now. Too late. The memories came faster, overlapping, layering, a version of him laughing in a place he had never been, a version of him arguing with someone he didn't recognize, a version of him walking away from something he couldn't quite see. Each one felt real, not like imagination, not like possibility, like something that had already happened. His hands trembled. "No," he whispered. His eyes darted across the rows. And then he saw it, a label, clear, sharp, unmistakable. His name. He froze. Slowly, he stepped closer. There it was, his name, followed by a date, a time, an identifier. Just like all the others, his breath grew shallow. He turned. Another device. Same name, different date. Another, and another, and another. Dozens, then hundreds, stretching into the distance. All of them, him. "No," he said again, but this time the word carried no resistance, only realization. "This isn't possible." Behind him, the scientist said nothing, because there was nothing left to explain. The truth was already unfolding. The protagonist stumbled backward, turning in a slow circle as the scale of it became undeniable. Every direction, every row. His name repeated endlessly, not variations, not approximations, exact, precise, consistent. "You said these were unstable records," he said, his voice barely holding together. "They are." "Then why are there so many of me?" The question echoed, but the answer was already there, in the patterns, in the memories, in the impossible repetition. Because he wasn't just witnessing changes, he was part of them. A realization began to take shape, slow, heavy, unavoidable. Every memory he had seen, every version of himself, they weren't separate, they were connected. Different outcomes, different paths, different realities, all branching from the same point. Him. His chest tightened, his thoughts fractured under the weight of it. "I don't understand," he said. You will, the scientist replied quietly. The protagonist shook his head, stepping back again as the devices around him continued to flicker, reacting to his presence. No, this doesn't make sense. I'm just one person. Are you? The scientist asked. The question cut deeper than anything else. The protagonist looked at his hands. They felt the same, solid, real. And yet, everything around him said otherwise. Another device activated, a final surge. This time, there was no scene, no place, no clear memory, just a feeling, a moment of decision, a choice, unseen but powerful. And in that moment, he understood something he couldn't fully explain. The changes, the inconsistencies, the shifting reality. They weren't random. They were outcomes, results, consequences of something, of someone. His breathing slowed, not calmer, but heavier, more certain. He lifted his head slowly, turning back toward the scientist, and though the question had already been answered, he asked it anyway. What am I? The lights around him flickered violently. The archive hummed, louder than before, as if responding, as if recognizing. And for the first time since he entered, he wasn't just observing the archive anymore. He was connected to it, at the center of it. And whatever this place truly was, it wasn't just storing versions of him. It was built because of him. The realization. The noise didn't come from the machines, it came from everywhere. A low, resonant hum began to rise through the archive, not loud, not sudden, but impossible to ignore. It vibrated through the floor, through the air, through him. The protagonist stood frozen, surrounded by rows of devices still flickering with unstable light. His name, everywhere, hundreds of times, hundreds of versions, each one a life he had never lived or had. His breathing slowed, not from calm, but from overload. His mind could no longer keep pace with what he was seeing. The instinct to deny it, to reject it as impossible, began to weaken. Because the evidence was no longer subtle, it was overwhelming. I'm not all of this, he said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. The scientist didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence quiet but grounding in the chaos. You're trying to separate yourself from it, he said gently, because that's what makes sense. It's what feels safe. The protagonist shook his head, his eyes still scanning the endless rows. This isn't safe. None of this is. No, the scientist agreed. It isn't. Another flicker passed through the archive, stronger this time. Several devices surged at once, their light intensifying before stabilizing again. New labels etched themselves into their surfaces, new timestamps, new entries, appearing in real time. The protagonist stared. They're still updating, he whispered. Yes. With more versions of me? The scientist didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. The protagonist let out a slow breath, his thoughts beginning to shift, not toward understanding, but toward acceptance of something he couldn't yet fully define. All those memories, he said, they weren't just different realities. No, they were different outcomes. The scientist nodded, of the same origin. The words settled heavily. The protagonist closed his eyes for a moment, and in that brief darkness, fragments returned, not full memories, not complete scenes, just impressions, choices, moments where something could have gone one way or another, and somehow it had gone both. His eyes opened. They all come from me, he said. It wasn't a question anymore. The scientist watched him closely. Yes. The hum deepened. The air itself seemed to tighten, as if the archive was reacting to the realization. But that doesn't make sense, the protagonist continued. One person can't create multiple realities. Not intentionally, the scientist said. The protagonist turned sharply. What does that mean? The scientist hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. It means, he said carefully, that whatever is happening isn't entirely under your control. A chill ran through the protagonist. He looked back at the devices, at the endless repetition of his own name. At least, not consciously, the scientist added. The distinction didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. So I'm doing this? The protagonist asked. All of it? The changes? The shifts? You are part of the cause, the scientist replied. Part of? He repeated. The scientist didn't elaborate, which was again its own answer. The protagonist ran a hand through his hair, trying to ground himself. This doesn't make sense, he said. Why me? Why would I? You're asking the wrong question, the scientist interrupted. Then what's the right one? The scientist stepped closer. Why does reality respond to you at all? Silence. The protagonist's thoughts stalled, because that question he didn't have an answer for, and for the first time he realized he had never even considered it. Another surge rippled through the archive. This time, it wasn't subtle. Entire rows flickered at once, lights pulsing erratically, some dimming, others flaring brighter than before. The system was reacting to him. He could feel it now, not physically, not in any way he could describe, but something in the air, something in the structure of the space was aligning with his presence, or breaking because of it. He took a slow step forward. The devices nearest to him responded instantly, their glow intensifying, their surfaces rippling as if anticipating contact. He stopped. They stabilized. Another step. They reacted again. His chest tightened. "It's not just storing the changes," he said slowly. The scientist remained silent. "It's responding to me." "Yes." The word was quiet, but final. The protagonist looked at his reflection in one of the devices. It stared back at him, unchanged, and yet everything around it said otherwise. "All those versions," he said, "they're not just records. No, they're outcomes of my decisions. Yes, and the archive," he continued, his voice lowering, "it exists to track them." The scientist didn't correct him this time, because this time he was close enough. The protagonist's reflection wavered slightly in the glass surface, distorted by the pulsing light within. "How many are there?" he asked. The scientist followed his gaze, then looked back at him. "More than you can count." A long pause. "And it's still growing." Another pause. "Yes." The protagonist exhaled slowly, not in fear, not anymore, but in something heavier. Understanding, not complete, not comfortable, but undeniable. He looked out across the endless archive one more time, at the scale, at the repetition, at the impossibility of it all. And for the first time, he stopped trying to reject it, because whether he understood it or not, it was already happening, and somehow it had always been happening. The final truth. The archive grew quieter, not because the machines had stopped, but because something had changed. The hum was still there, deep and constant, vibrating beneath every surface. The light still flickered, devices still pulsed with unstable energy. New entries continued to appear in distant rows, but around him, there was stillness, the kind that follows realization. The protagonist stood at the center of it, no longer moving, no longer searching. His eyes drifted slowly across the endless rows, but this time, he wasn't trying to understand what he was seeing. He already knew, or at least enough. "They're not just records," he said quietly. The scientist stood a few steps behind him, silent. "They're outcomes," the protagonist continued. "Every version, every change, every shift in reality." His voice lowered. "They all come from the same source." The scientist didn't interrupt, because there was nothing left to correct. The protagonist turned slowly. To me, the words didn't shake. They settled, heavy, final. The scientist met his gaze. Yes, no hesitation, no denial, just truth. The space between them felt different now. Not tense, not uncertain. It was something else, inevitable. The protagonist let out a slow breath, his thoughts aligning in a way they hadn't before. Not clearer, but more complete. "So every time reality changes," he said, "it's because of a decision." "Yes, and every decision creates a new version." "Yes, and the old one," he gestured around them, "ends up here." The scientist nodded once. "Preserved before it collapses." The protagonist looked down at his hands. They didn't look different. They didn't feel different. But now he knew. They were not singular. They were not fixed. They were one outcome among countless others. "I'm not just in the system," he said slowly. The scientist said nothing, because he knew what was coming. "I'm the variable." Silence. Then a quiet correction. "No." The protagonist looked up. The scientist stepped closer, his expression calm but heavier than before. "You're not the variable." A pause. "You're the constant." The words landed harder than anything else. The protagonist's breath caught. "That doesn't make sense," he said, but the resistance was weak now. The scientist gestured outward, toward the archive, toward the infinite rows of recorded realities. "Every version changes," he said. "Every outcome is different. Every reality shifts, adapts, rewrites itself." His gaze returned to the protagonist. "But you are always there." Silence. In every version, the scientist continued, in every variation, in every possible outcome, you exist. The realization settled slowly, but when it did, it changed everything. Not a participant, not a cause, something deeper, something structural. The protagonist turned again, looking out over the archive, at the repetition of his name, at the endless variations of himself, and for the first time, he saw it not as chaos, but as pattern, a system, a center. His chest tightened. This place, he said quietly. The scientist waited. It's not just preserving reality. No, it's built around it. Another pause, then the final step, the final connection. The protagonist turned back, his voice barely above a whisper. It's built around me. The scientist held his gaze, and this time, there was no distance left between explanation and truth. You're not in the archive, he said softly. A long silence followed. The lights flickered once more. The hum deepened, as if the entire structure was listening, waiting. And then, the words that changed everything. You're what the archive was built around. The moment stretched, no sound, no movement, just understanding. And in that understanding, something shifted. Not in the archive, not in the world above, but in him. Because if the archive existed to preserve every version of reality, and every version of reality revolved around him, then the question was no longer what this place was or how it worked, but what would happen next time he made a choice. The question that remains. The archive did not collapse. It did not shut down. It did not react the way he expected. Instead, it continued. The hum remained steady. The lights flickered, then stabilized. New entries appeared in distant rows, quietly integrating into the endless system, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. The protagonist stood alone now. The scientist was gone. No footsteps, no sound of departure, just absence. As if he had never been there at all, or perhaps as if he was no longer needed. The realization lingered, heavy but clear. There were no more explanations, no more guidance, only the truth and what came after it. He turned slowly, looking out across the archive one last time. It felt different now. Not unfamiliar, not overwhelming, but understood. Each device, each light, each recorded moment. They weren't mysteries anymore. They were consequences, outcomes of choices made and choices not taken. Versions of reality that had once existed and no longer did, yet still remained here, preserved, not for the world, but for something else, for reference, for balance, for him. He walked forward, slowly, deliberately. The devices near him responded, soft pulses of light, subtle ripples across their surfaces, not chaotic anymore, synchronized, connected. He stopped in front of one, a new entry, fresh, unstable, still forming. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to, because he already understood what it was. Another version, another outcome, another reality shaped by a moment, a decision, his decision. The thought no longer felt distant or abstract. It felt immediate, personal, inevitable. He looked down at his hand, still steady, still his, and yet not fixed, never fixed. Every movement, every choice, every hesitation, it all mattered. Not just here, but everywhere, above the city, beyond the archive, across realities he would never see, but would still create. A quiet question formed in his mind, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, responsibility. If every choice created a new version of reality, then which one mattered? The one he lived in, or the countless others left behind? He turned slightly, glancing back at the endless rows, at the archive that held them all, silent, endless, watching, waiting, not judging, just recording. The weight of it settled fully now. There was no escape from it, no way to undo it, no way to stop it, because it wasn't something happening around him, it was something happening through him. He was not trapped in the system, he was the reason it existed. And that meant every next moment mattered more than the last. He looked forward again, into the distance, into the unseen, into whatever came next. And for the first time since entering the archive, he didn't hesitate. But just before he took a step, one final thought remained. Quiet, unanswered, unavoidable. If every choice creates a new reality, then which version of him is the one that's real?
Shadows